Hello, my name is Cappy Svenson, and for this project, I decided to interview my dad, Scott Svenson. He is an ambitious entrepreneur who has founded multiple successful companies, but he is also somebody who pays very close attention to American politics. He defines his political ideology as being physically conservative and socially moderate, but I'll let him elaborate more on that.
I would consider myself more of a fiscal conservative and socially moderate.
What do you mean by that?
I believe in more discipline around how we collect and spend resource, but I'm more progressive when it comes to how we use that money to make sure we take care of the people in our society who are least capable of taking care of themselves.
Has your stance or view shifted over time, or has it stayed the same?
It's been pretty much the same. It has definitely evolved, and I've probably become a little bit more socially progressive with time, but otherwise philosophically generally the same.
At one point, my dad actually had the idea of one day pursuing a political career, but his reasoning for his change of heart really interested me.
There was a time in my life when I thought that I would work hard and have a successful business career and then eventually give back by going into politics, but I've decided there are probably better ways for me to give back.
Is there a certain thing that drew you away from politics, or?
Yeah, I think there's some things about the political system that I think are broken, but one of the things that's very distasteful is just the way in which you have to go about marketing yourself, positioning yourself, and pandering to kind of the broader voter base to get elected. I think the way in which that encourages bad behavior and people compromising their ideals and standards just to get elected is something that's not very attractive to me.
At this point in the interview, I threw a hypothetical situation at my dad. Regardless of his skepticism towards the nature of the current election process, I wanted to know what his first three courses of action would be if he were elected president. In other words, what are his three biggest concerns with the current state of the American government?
Well, I think they're a little bit different today, just given the political environment we've been managing through. I think the first thing I would do is try to restore some civility and dignity to the office of the presidency. And I think there's a lot of damage that's been done that needs to be repaired. And some of that is symbolic and some of that is substantive in terms of the way we interact with our allies abroad and just the way that the president is perceived and shows up and interacts with the other branches of government and society. So that's a big one. I think there's a big opportunity there to improve things. And then beyond that, I think there's a need to address kind of some of the physical imbalances. Politicians have made promises for a long time that we really are not in a position to keep, and I think politicians need to do the hard work of rebalancing our ability to fund, programs and entitlements and other commitments with our ability to pay. They've kind of pushed it off, and future generations are going to get stuck with the bill, and it's going to be difficult for them because our economy will suffer significantly if we don't rebalance that. So that's
and you're referring to national debt when you say that?
Yeah, the debt and our annual budget process, which is, I think, kind of broken right now. And then lastly, there's a bunch of big projects from the environment to infrastructure, education, healthcare, that all need attention, but I think they are all, priorities that flow out of that second issue of we've got to make choices about what we can, as a government, can afford and what the private sector needs to step up and do. I think there's more, just given where we are right now, the private sector needs to be doing more and the public sector needs to be focused, needs to be more effective at doing fewer things better.
Of those three responses, I was most interested in his concern with national debt. Obviously, in order to solve this major issue, we would need to cut back spending in certain areas. So I asked my dad, where do you believe we could afford to spend less?
There are a couple of things. One, defense is an area where I do believe that we need to provide for the common defense. I think we need to do so efficiently and effectively, and I'm not sure whether or not that's being done right now. And then there's a big one of Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, that need to be addressed. We need to be thinking carefully about who should be the beneficiaries of those types of programs. And I think it's not about necessarily taking away benefits from those who need it. It's more taking away benefits from those who don't need it. Your mom and I have been paying into Social Security our whole career, and the reality is that we would be able to manage our retirement without it. And so I would be in support of that money being redistributed to those who need it, and then rebalancing the way in which we're collecting taxes and funding these programs. I think there just needs to be some hard choices made around. You can't, I think the laws of economics apply over the long term, meaning you can't continue to spend more than you earn without having to eventually pay the price. And while we're building up our debt, and we're technically able to sustain it now, interest on our debt is becoming a bigger and bigger percentage of the national budget every year, and that's just unsustainable, particularly as interest rates start going up, and therefore we start to get into a compounding effect of, what we don't want to do is in the future, for every $100 we bring in tax revenue, 50 cents of that just goes to service the debt for all the money that was spent for the past 2 generations, because the next generation is going to get screwed. And so we've got to, at some point, address that so that we don't handicap the future generations.
America is an incredible place. It provides opportunity and security like no other civilization that this world has ever seen. However, it is not perfect, and the issues discussed so far in this podcast are just a few of the many on the minds of American people. Now that we have established some of these issues, I wanted to know what my dad looks for when voting for political candidates. More specifically, I wanted to know if he has an actual process.
Yeah, it's not a formal process, and it also depends on which office they're running for. So if they were a congressman or senator, I would kind of evaluate them based on their character, how they present themselves, the consistency over time. Also, clearly their politics and their policies. So I would wrap all of those things together and ultimately vote for somebody who I believed in and somebody who I had faith in and who I believe would make the right decisions and put the country above themselves. When it comes to the president, it's slightly different because, yes, while their policies and politics matter, ultimately I think their character and what they represent, because the president is such a huge symbol of American democracy that I think it's a different standard. And then beyond that, I think the most important thing to evaluate when electing a president is who's the person if things get really bad and all hell breaks loose. And there's one person that we're all looking to make the right decision to either keep us safe or, address a crisis the right way. The president in those moments has so much power that you've got to really have faith that the person's going to do the right thing.
Overall, I really enjoyed talking to my dad about his political views. It felt good to hear a familiar and new voice talk about politics, rather than listening to the same group of politicians yell at each other on the TV. Thanks for listening.